Hey there everybody, how's it going? My name is Thamri, welcome everybody to Final Fantasy XIV. In today's video, I'd like to talk about Dark Knight, and I gotta say, in patch 4.05, and ever since patch 4.0, Dark Knight just feels more fun. There's less complexity that was in Heaven's Ward, there's no damage over time management, there's no counter after the parry ability that we used to have. I completely forgot what the name of it was. I know what the abilities do, and I know what the icons do, I just don't remember the names. It is just a thing with me. I'm terrible when it comes to names of abilities, so I do apologize about that. But if you know what I'm talking about, the counter that you had when you parried an attack, that's the one I'm talking about. That is gone. The damage over time ability is gone, so there's not much for us to really worry about. Aside from Dark Knight being just simpler, fun to play, the armor for it looks absolutely amazing. I'm trying to get myself into the sunlight here so that you can see what the armor looks like. This is the initial armor you get when you reach level 70 and you finish your last Dark Knight job quest. And while I'm trying to catch a little bit more sun so the light can be seen better and you can see the armor better, it absolutely looks amazing. Really speaks Dark Knight, and there's something kind of maybe like a Japanese Oni, Japanese demon about it. I don't fully understand the style for it, but I love it. It looks absolutely amazing. The visor though looks a little bit wonky. As of changes in 4.05, Dark Knight have gotten just minor changes. Most of the changes came to the other classes like Dragoons and Scholars and a little bit of White Mages. Warriors got a major rework on some of their key abilities to make them very competitive. Dark Knight got a buff to Soul Eater, and a mana generation is now coming from Quatus whenever we use Quatus. Quatus is the AoE that we spend with Blood that I didn't really use often or too often. A lot of changes for the tanks mostly came with how accessories are going to be functioning and working with the tanks and what kind of stats they're going to have. So that is the primary changes for the tanks where it came from. These minor buffs that we have for Dark Knight are just side stuff. But enough about other tanks, let's go ahead and jump directly into Dark Knight. So what are the new things that Dark Knight have going on for them at the moment? Well, as you can see right here with this new bar that we have, the sword, we actually get something called Black Blood that we can spend on certain abilities, and then spend it on 3 particular abilities that we get towards the end game. We spend it on Blood Splitter, Quatus, I'm not sure how to pronounce it yet, and Delirium. Black Knight doesn't use Blood Gauge, actually uses mana, but it does work directly for the Blood Gauge, which is actually really important. But let's talk a little bit about the Blood Gauge. How do we build the Blood Gauge first of all? Well, part of our traits that we get at level 62 and 66 is Black Blood allows Blood Gauge accumulation upon landing of certain actions, and Enhanced Black Blood allows the Blood Gauge accumulation while under the effect of Blood Weapon or Blood Price, which is actually pretty cool. So there are mainly 3 or 4 ways that we can build it. First one is Salted Earth. Salted Earth will end up building us a Blood Gauge. Let me just go ahead and go to the usual stances that I'll usually build up. Drop Salted Earth and get your targets in. And Salted Earth, according to the ability, also increases Blood Gauge by 1 as it hits enemies. So if you have multiple enemies standing in it, every single tick of the Salted Earth will build your Blood Gauge, which is actually still pretty good. Then we have Blood Price, and that also increases your Blood Gauge by 1 per hit on you. So every single time you're getting hit on you, let's say you take it on multiple groups, you drop Salted Earth, put on Blood Price, and that will start building up your Blood Gauge. Another way to do it, part of the cooldowns just in general, is dropping Grid, so you can use Blood Weapon, and a Blood Weapon should start increasing your Blood Gauge as you attack. In order to build Blood in combat, you need to use the Soul Eater combo in order to build Blood, as every single time you use Soul Eater while it's in combo, you actually build a lot of Blood, so use that whenever you can. There we go. Good way to build it. Another good way to build it is by dropping Blackest Night on you. It creates a barrier around self that absorbs damage totaling 20% of your maximum HP, or around a party member that absorbs damage of totaling 10% of your maximum HP. Increases Blood Gauge by 50 when full 20% or 10% is absorbed. So what it does is puts an absorber in you, which is a little bit stronger, or absorber in an ally. So let's say, for example, if you're playing as an off tank, you can put it on a main tank, like a paladin or something. And once the absorb is fully gone and fully drained through, then it restores 50 Blood Gauge for you. So this is a great way to build Blood, a fantastic way to build 50 Blood immediately. You just gotta make sure that whoever is getting hit is actually getting hit, and once it fully absorbs the entire ability from them, then you should be just fine. And you get 5 full seconds for it. If you're going to be going in a raid battle in some sort of raid-wide AoE, or somebody's getting focused on or targeted or has a prey marker on them, that's probably the best time to use Blackest Night. You gotta keep in mind though, the mana management is very important because this drains up 2400 mana in general for Dark Knight. The entire premise, entire playing, at least from what I kind of figured out and from what I got to experience, as I was playing. Dark Knight is very based around mana. Everything that you do is going to be very mana based. A lot of your AoE abilities, such as Unleash, uses 1080 mana, your Episode Drain uses 1320 mana, and that's pretty much the same how it was back in Hemsworth. But instead this time, I figure out Dark Arts plays a huge part in a lot of your abilities. It did play before in Hemsworth, but I feel like it plays a lot more this time around. I feel like I'm using Dark Arts a lot more. I'm actually spamming Dark Arts in most of the cases if I'm not using Blackest Night. Mana management is extremely important, and it became a lot easier to do in Stormblood than it was in Hemsworth. In Hemsworth, it was kind of a struggle to have. Now, it's extremely easy. Let's say, for example, I use up Blackest Night. Let's go ahead and, what else can we use here? Let's use Unleash a couple times, right? So we use Unleash a couple times, just spending some mana. There we go. Now, watch how much mana Siphon Strike gets. Let's go ahead and keep ourselves in combat for a little bit. Let's see how much mana Siphon Strike gets for us. Regular attack, and then Siphon Strike. That's not a lot. It's not a lot. It seems 1200 mana is not a lot, but if you put on Grit and use Siphon Strike again, right? Let's go and do that again. 2400 mana. That's a major increase. So now you receive more mana while in Grit stance with using Siphon Strike combo. So I highly recommend using that if you're main tank. If you're going to be off tanking, you really just don't have much really to use except just dropping Grit, going into Dark Side, turning a Blood Weapon, and using that as a way to build mana a lot for you. And as you build mana a lot for you, it shouldn't be really that hard for you as long as you maintain Blood Weapon in order to build mana. So at that point, you should have no problem with mana if you're going to be an off tank or going to be doing some DPS. But if you're going to be main tanking, using Siphon Strike with Grit, it will gain you 2400 mana, and that's a lot. 2400 mana is enough to already execute one Blackest Night. It's able to execute you one Dark Arts, able to execute you one Dark Passenger, able to execute you multiple Unleashes, and able to execute at least one Abyssal Drain. And making sure you understand what all the abilities do and how much mana they take up is pretty important, especially when using Dark Arts. Now, Dark Arts, like in Hemsworth, still enhance some of your abilities, but to explain a little bit more, if maybe, let's say for example, you're new to Dark Knight, Dark Arts can be used in order to enhance your Dark Mind. With Dark Arts, instead of 15% magical reduction, you get 30% magical reduction, which is really good. Another good ability is Dark Passenger that can be used with Dark Arts. Dark Passenger is the AoE ability that you get like this, the one that hits enemies in a line. If you use Dark Arts and Dark Passenger, it applies a blind for 15 seconds for your enemies. And obviously, if you keep applying it, it's going to get from 15 seconds to like 12 seconds to 9 seconds. It has a deterioration rate of applying blind. Blind will make it so that your enemies are less likely to hit you, which means if you're taking on AoE of enemies and you're taking a large group of adds, it's best to apply blind on them so that you're less likely to get hit, so the healers don't have to have such a heart attack every single time they heal you. Another way that Dark Arts can enhance your abilities is with Carven Spit. Carven Spit delivers a 3-fold attack with potency of 100, restores MP if used while not under the effect of Dark Arts, but if it is with the effect of Dark Arts, it gives you 450 potency. So if you're off tank and you have plenty of mana to spend, you can go Dark Arts and Carven Spit, which will do 4694 damage, which is alright when used by itself without any cooldowns. So it's pretty good. Another way Dark Arts can influence your abilities, let's go ahead and just go from right to left and just kind of talk about every single ability that we have here on the hotbar. Quetas can be enhanced with Dark Arts. Dark Art potency will raise it to 210 potency instead of 160. This is just a regular AoE ability. It's nothing too fancy. If anything, I feel like it's kind of weak, but it's still pretty decent in spending something on your blood. Let's say, for example, you're taking on a lot of enemies, you have a bunch of enemies around you, and with changes to the ability in 4.05, it now generates mana. So if you're really mana starved and you have a lot of blood to spend, you can feel free to spend it on Quetas in order to gain some mana back while generating some AoE aggro. It still hits pretty hard. It's not the hardest hitting ability, but it still hits pretty hard, especially with Dark Arts on, which should be pretty good. You still might want to use it every now and then when you can. Let's talk a little bit about this particular ability called Blood Spiller. This ability is actually pretty powerful. Delivers an attack for potency of 400, Dark Arts potency by itself is 540, Grit potency is 475, Dark Arts and Grit is 650, It does cost 50 blood gauge. Most of your abilities will cost roughly 50 blood gauge. Overall, as long as you have a full blood gauge, you should be all good. To show a little bit of difference, what it's going to be like with grid and non-grid, let me go ahead and demonstrate to you. This is going to be Dark Arts and Dark Side, no grid at the moment. I'm going to show you the difference in damage. It's still able to do a decent amount of damage even in grid, and it still allows it to maintain the damage even in grid, but at the same time grid does make it so that it reduces damage taken while reducing damage dealt by 20% for both taken and dealt. So with grid on its own, in a tank stance, you are getting slightly enough from damage, but to show you an example of what it's like to use a Blood Spiller with Dark Hearts with grid on and off, this is grid off right now. 5942, and sometimes I get a very lucky crit of 7k before in the past. This is with a grid on. Yes, for science. 5752, so it still hits really nice whether it has a grid or no grid. So, if you're going to be playing with grid and you want to make sure you're putting out a lot of DPS, I highly recommend trying to use Blood Spiller with Dark Arts. Whether you have grid on or off, that's just a lot of damage to do as a Dark Knight. And I highly recommend to spend it mostly with a Dark Arts combination with your abilities. Make sure to manage your mana, make sure you're not overspending your mana, only spend when you can. Whether it's a defensive cooldown with Dark Mind, whether it's to enhance the damage of Blood Spiller, or whether it's to enhance anything like Siphon Strike and Soul Eater, which actually Dark Arts doesn't enhance. If you have an excess of mana as in Dark Knight, what typically I would use is use a little bit of Soul Eater in order to do the Siphon Strike combo, Soul Eater combo, and spend a little bit of your Dark Arts onto Siphon Strike and Soul Eater in order to just increase the amount of DPS. The potency is not exactly amazing, but with Soul Eater, it actually increases the amount of healing that you get for yourself. Since your potency for your Soul Eater gets increased, the amount of self-healing you do also gets increased. And in most cases, it can actually help out a healer, especially in a bind or with a tank buster, and constantly feeding yourself health from enemies is probably the best way to constantly sustain yourself and give healers a little bit of an edge while doing a lot of damage as well. Just go ahead and go into Hard Slash, Dark Arts, go into Siphon Strike, do extra damage, a Dark Arts again, and Soul Eater. And the amount of healing gets actually really important. In fact, I try in most of my cases, in most scenarios, try to use Dark Hearts together with Soul Eater so I absorb more health. And the more health I absorb, less healer has to worry too much about things. And when you're popping cooldowns and able to self-heal, it's actually very important and allows the Dark Knight to kind of self-sustain themselves. It's not a healer ability. It doesn't heal you exactly like a healer ability would, but it does heal you for like 2k health. That's still pretty solid and allows you to mitigate damage a little bit better. Now, another ways that Dark Arts works with you, it's actually a really good ability to use. Abyssal Drain works with Dark Arts. With Dark Arts effect, absorbs a portion of damage dealt as HP, and Abyssal Drain on its own deals unexpected damage with a potency of 120 to targets and all enemies in your bind. The best time I was able to figure out how to use this ability is when you have a lot of enemies around you, right? You build up a little bit of your mana, you use Dark Arts and Dark Passage to blind your enemies first of all, so they're less likely to hit you. If you need to pop Rampart or something, or pop a simple cooldown, maybe pop Blackest Night to absorb a little bit more damage, but otherwise, it's a really great ability to use in an AoE when you're taking a lot of damage in order to self-sustain yourself. And you would think that the potency of Abyssal Drain would be really weak. No, when you have a lot of people around you, when you're surrounded by enemies, that's a lot of healing you can do back to back to back. If you're going to be doing an Abyssal Drain Dark Arts spam, I'd highly recommend building up a lot of your mana. But to show a little bit of demonstration of what this ability is like, let me just build up a little bit more mana. Make sure you have roughly this amount of mana left with you. It's going to be something you're going to have to get used to when it comes to managing your mana as best you can. But let's go ahead and use Dark Arts, and let's use Abyssal Drain. Boom! That's a lot of self-healing you can spam back to back to back. Also, using Carbon Spit for mana is also really good, especially when you're going to be main tanking. I usually use it when I'm main tanking. If I don't ever use, I don't ever not use Dark Hearts and Carbon Spit when I'm off tanking, because the amount of damage, 415 potency of damage, is really good when it comes to trying to burst out the boss. And especially if you're going to be off tanking, it's not that big of a deal. Because, I mean, if you're able to do more damage, it doesn't matter how much mana you really need. You can always get mana slowly with Siphon Strike or with Blood Weapon. The one thing I didn't talk about before is Delirium, because it's not an ability I use too often. I mean, there's certain situations that I use it, but I try to spend most of my blood on blood spiller, really, if anything at all. But to talk a little bit about Delirium. Delirium extends blood weapon and blood price effects by 8 seconds and 16 seconds respectively. So blood weapon, let's say for example, let's go ahead and drop grid. So let's say for example, I'm about to pop blood weapon, and I feel like there's a slightly longer time that I can extend blood weapon for to maybe get my mana back or just do more damage in general. Somebody maybe pop a cooldown in the raid, and we going into a DPS phase. We're trying to push the enemy's health. If you use blood weapon or if you use blood price and then you use Delirium, watch the cooldown, see 13 seconds, 12 seconds, 11 seconds, boop, back 19 seconds. You can actually use Delirium immediately when you use a blood weapon. As soon as blood weapon is applied to you, you apply Delirium, it already will extend the Delirium cooldown past its original lasting potency. So it's actually really good. You can use it immediately back to back in order to pour a lot of damage into the enemy as an off tank. There is one thing I would like to talk about that was changed in patch 4.05. Accessories now in for tanks have some strength accessory back, and squares try to make attempts on making it so that tanks don't have a reason to run the item level 270 accessories anymore. And as of this moment right now, on the DPS scale, on the total damage that tank's able to do, I believe Warriors is going to be topping it, and then next are Paladin and Dark Knight sitting pretty much at an equal level with one another. So if you want to play Dark Knight, understand you will not be the biggest damage dealing tank out there, and if you are a tank connoisseur that wants the damage, then consider playing a Warrior. But right now, Dark Knight at the moment is sitting at a very, very comfortable spot, I would say. Very, very comfortable spot. I don't believe it's gonna be knocked down anytime soon, at least I hope not. Nevertheless, hopefully Square can fix it, we won't have to worry about it. But nevertheless, that is really the entire class, this entire Dark Knight class. Otherwise, this class is actually really fun. If you want to play a really fun tank and you don't want to play Paladin and maybe Warrior is not exactly a forte, I highly, highly recommend trying out Dark Knight. Now, you don't get the blood gauge up until level 62 and stuff like that. Up to level 70, that's the only time blood gauge is actually useful. But aside from that, you just kind of play Dark Knight and try it out. See if you like it. Some of the cross-roll abilities I highly recommend grabbing as a Dark Knight are obviously Rampart, it's really important. Provoke, in order to do tank swaps. Convalescence is really important, healers are gonna love you. Now, for the other ones, you can grab Awareness if you want to, but I highly recommend using the Reprisal as well. Lowers target's damage dealt by 10%, and that means any kind of AoE can be pretty well done, or if you're going to be dealing with a Tank Buster, this is actually pretty good as well. Pop Reprisal and pop Blackest Night. If you don't have any other cooldowns available, you can do that. You can grab Awareness if you really want to, but I really, really like Reprisal, especially when I'm off-tanking, and I can mitigate some of the tank busting happening on the main tank. Now, I know if you ever had somebody tell you you have to grab Shirk is really important. You might be thinking, I mean, how important is Shirk is? I mean, to be honest, it diverts 25% of all amenity to a target that you pick. So let's say, for example, you're doing a tank swap, they have the tank provoked, you can immediately Shirk them to boost their aggro to the very top so that the boss is focusing on them. It is an excellent combination of provoke Shirk in order to do tank swaps. I highly, highly recommend having provoke and Shirk at all times on your tank. And if for whatever reason, let's say Shirk is on cooldown, you can, however, use a amenity generation and dark arts combination with Power Slash. When Power Slash is used with dark arts through the combination, when it is going through the amenity generation combination, then you can gain a buttload more amenity. Dark arts actually adds more amenity that Power Slash generates. And let's say, for example, Shirk is on cooldown for the other tank, and you need to do a tank swap at a certain area. And let's say, for example, you're fighting this training dummy, a very, intimidating looking training dummy, has a very scary target circle on its face. In case Shirk is down for the other tank, the other thing which you can do to try to... So assuming that Shirk is on cooldown for the other tank, but you need to do a tank swap at the time, what you want to do is build up the aggro generation combo to Power Slash, and right before Power Slash, you want to make sure Dark Arts provoke, and then directly into Power Slash in order to generate a ton more aggro, hopefully putting you at the top. So what provoke does, it just puts you at the top. It doesn't maintain you at the top, it just puts you at the top. You gotta maintain yourself and lock yourself into the amenity generation. Make sure you produce enough amenity to stay at the top. But following it up with Power Slash and Dark Arts is a solid way to lock you into the very top. So I highly recommend using that if you maybe have Shirk off cooldown. Otherwise, Shirk is just something you're gonna have to get used to using with the other off tank or the other tank in your static, and just try to practice it. That's about it. Aside from that, Dark Knight is highly fun to play. I highly recommend trying out Dark Knight. For the gear, for the lore, for the quest that he gets, and for the entire experience of playing Dark Knight, it's really fun. And the utility of Blackest Night can be used on everybody and anybody in the party. It has, let me see what kind of cooldown it has actually. 15-second cooldown refresh, so it means you can spam it pretty regularly. Just gotta make sure you're managing the mana. Look out for the mana at all times. That's literally it. The entire Dark Knight meta is look out for the mana. TP, I would never worry about it. TP, I hardly even spend TP to even get to even 75% of the total TP. You honestly regenerate a ton of TP in Stormblood, so TP is never a bother, like, ever. So the only thing you gotta worry is about mana. Make sure you Siphon Strike whenever you can. Make sure you use a Blood Price to get some mana back. Make sure to get Blood Weapon if you're off tank to get some mana back. And that's about it. Otherwise, have fun playing Dark Knight. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope this explains a little bit more about Dark Knight and what it's like. I hope you'll enjoy and have fun playing Dark Knight for yourselves. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up right here. My name is Samuel. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later in the next video. See ya!